The following is from the Agency for Instructional Technology, AIT.
A pyramid and a square block or rectangle are not difficult to sketch. In this program, Paul will show you how to draw and shade these geometric shapes. Once you understand these simple four-sided shapes, you'll learn how to sketch 6- and 8-sided figures.
The block and the rectangular solid are the most common geometric shapes found in and around your home. They're repeated many times in furniture, in utensils, in the structure of your house. Here in this case, in a divan, not only do we have a rectangular solid, but we have inside the rectangular solid we have squares and blocks of different dimensions. Even down here on this coffee table, the top surface is a rectangular solid, and if you would box the entire object in, you would find it another rectangular solid. And many smaller objects come under this classification, such as a book. All books are rectangular solids. And if you have a library full of them or shelves, you're simply repeating those shapes. So you see hundreds of these around within a room, any room, whether it's an office or schoolroom or your home. This could be, a lampshade could be a rectangular solid, and so could the stem of it, although it can be made up of other forms also. Even the picture on the wall is a rectangular solid. It could be a square, but in this case it's a rectangle, and though it's very flat and doesn't have much depth, it still falls into that classification. Let me give you some helpful tips in sketching the block-free hand. I want to start out in the beginning. It's very important. We're not using instruments. I think of starting with the center line, the corner, first. And it can be turned at any angle. Your block can be seen from different angles. But I think of it first, and then at the top of that, if I'm looking down on the top of it, I will have a flat Y, like a letter Y. Now, once I've established this Y, I've set the direction of my sides. Now, in drawing the opposite side, always remember in a perspective that it'll be less than parallel. These lines will tend to go out and meet at a point somewhere out on the eye level, the vanishing point. So you make them a little less than level when you're sketching. And with practice, you get on to this. Same way with this line. It's shorter than this line, because it is supposed to be farther away to the eye. Now your vertical lines are parallel. No perspective to them. They're parallel. Now, when I'm going to draw this line, I look up at the opposite line, and I keep it in mind, and they'll be less than parallel as they recede off a point in the horizon. Now, to complete the block, the bottom line, I'm conscious of this top line. As I draw the bottom line, it's the same way. They're less than parallel, and this line will be shorter than this line. Now, as far as shading the block, that's very easy. There's no gradation in the shade. If I assume that the light is high in this direction, then this side is the furthest from the light, so of course it'll be the darkest. So it's a matter of just shading that side. The darkest part. Now this side here, the light may be over past the center, this way. So it would be not as dark, but it would still be a little bit darker than the top, because the top would be facing the light. The pyramid is related to the block in that both have a base that is square. But the pyramid is a little bit easier to draw, especially after you have sketched the block. Now let me give you this tip here. When you're sketching a pyramid, draw the base first. And in drawing the base, start with the top of the Y. Here. Now, the other line is sketched, the other sides, and what you're trying to get here is a square in perspective. So you start out by drawing a square in perspective. After you have the square in perspective, it's helpful to make diagonal lines through the corners. Where they cross is perspective center. Now, if I want the pyramid's point this way, I will draw down this way. If I want it up here, I'll draw up this way. So there's your perspective center. Now think of coming straight up with a line, be perpendicular to the base here. Straight up. It can be turned this way, or upside down. But this line should be perpendicular to the base. After you have that line, you can mark it off as you would the cone, any point on that line, to determine the height of your pyramid. Now, if you mark it there, then to drawing the sides, there's no guesswork. They'll come out in perspective all right if you just go from point to point. And over here to here. Now forget about these lines if you're looking down on it. If the eye level's up here, then these lines have served their purpose. They could be erased or they'll be covered with shadow. And shading the pyramid is like shading the block. The side opposite to the light is going to be your darkest side. So this is opposite. I would shade this side the darkest. However, and if the light is a little past center this way, then this side here may have a little shadow to it. But there's no top here because you're looking down on the pyramid. And there's no gradation in the shadow as there is on the cylinder and cone. It's just flat all the way down. After you've learned how to sketch the block in perspective, you can draw other objects that are related to the block in perspective. For example, if we want to draw an octagon, 8-sided object, we start with the top of a square in perspective. And we draw as we have drawn the block. 4 sides. But we want to end up with an object here that has 8 sides. So we divide the top surface into 3 equal sides in perspective. Now, a way to check yourself on that is to draw diagonal lines from the corners here and find your perspective center. And I see that this is a little bit off, so I make an adjustment here. This is too big. I want this to be in perspective center right there. Now, I'll draw these a little darker than I usually do so you can see them, but usually when I'm sketching an 8-sided solid, I'll make the lines very light and may erase when I'm finished. Now I'm dividing my lines here so I end up with 9 different squares. 9 different squares to get an 8-sided object. Here again I'll go over them. 3 this way and 3 this way. Now it's not hard. After you have that, you have points to draw to. I draw from this point to this point. It's almost like sculpturing. You're cutting these from point to point. And I'm darkening them to show you, and here's a point here, so I cut it back to this point, and back to this point, and back to this point. And what you end up is a 8-sided object or an octagon in perspective. Now when I draw the vertical lines, they're all parallel, no perspective to them. And I cut a base here. I'm looking at my opposite top lines. And these are no longer needed. And I can shade here, and it'll help you. Shadows always help give a solidity or a form to something. And if this is the farthest part over here, of course, this would be the darkest. And this may not. But this is what we were after. And we started out with the square divided in 9 equal parts, and then went from each point cutting them, and there was no guesswork after we had our top surface. We've sketched the octagon freehand. Now how about sketching a 6-sided figure, the hexagon? And we begin the very same way. We begin with a square in perspective, representing the top surface of the form. It could be a coffee table, it could be a lamp table, or it could be any object that is in the shape that has 6 sides to it. So we have a block adjusted to 8 shapes first, now 6 shapes. Same way, we come over here and find perspective center. Now let's divide this as we did in drawing the octagon by 3s. So far, our approach is the same as drawing the 8-sided figure. But here's where it differs in a 6-sided figure. We have the 3 divisions here. Now we only have 2 divisions here. So we have less points, but we have 2 less sides also. So after you've divided this into 3 and this into 2, then find your points and sketch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. Started out the same way. Vertical lines are parallel, no perspective. Barely see this one over here, this side.
On your own piece of paper, try drawing an octagon. First, draw a square in perspective so that it appears to be lying down. Next, divide that square into 9 equal parts, keeping perspective in mind. With these lines as guidelines, turn the square into an 8-sided shape like a stop sign. Now draw vertical lines from the corners to create a solid. Draw in your baselines. With this knowledge of blocks, pyramids, and even octagons, take your imagination outdoors. Find these shapes and use them in a drawing. Drawing with Paul Ringler is produced by the Agency for Instructional Technology in association with the Oklahoma Educational Television Authority.